All right, so today's session is about being stateless in Malaysia. What is the way forward? Now, first of all, what defines a stateless person? So basically, a stateless person is someone who has no nationality to any state or any country. Now, according to the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNHCR, there are at least 10,000 stateless people in West Malaysia and alone, and unknown numbers in East Malaysia. That is actually quite a high number in Malaysia, and stateless people here are basically denied basic rights like education, jobs, and even healthcare, as they do not have any identification. Meaning to say that if they want to apply for PTPTN loan, or if they want to have any medical checkup, it's very difficult for them because they do not have all these basic rights, which as human beings, we are supposed to have all these under the federal constitution. Moving on, there are a few categories to identify stateless person. In order to classify them, there are a few categories, which here we have 6. Firstly, we have persons with long-standing residence since pre-independence and descendants, people who lack documentations, abandoned children or foundlings and adopted children, children of mixed marriages, children born out of wedlock or before the marriage was actually registered, indigenous persons, refugees, or children of migrant workers. Now, for this first category, which for people with long-standing residence since pre-independence and descendants, these are actually known as our moyang, our ancestors, where before the British colonial came over, and then we have our grandmother's mother who came, let's say, from China or India, right? So they are all under this category. So basically, this involves 3 generations within one family that are deemed to be stateless, which, like I said, first we have the grandmother, the mother, and then the daughter. So here in these slides today, right, I will be sharing a few pro bono cases that were referred or cited by the speakers during the webinar. So most of the cases here, they did not actually let us know who are exactly these people are. They just merely name them as a party, like for example, 1A or 1B. So this is what we will be seeing today. Now, as for this category, we have this scenario where as the grandmother here, she was born and has been living in Malaysia since pre-independence. So she's completely entitled to citizenship. But the problem was she did not have any paperwork attesting to this fact, and therefore she was not able to obtain citizenship herself. What more for her daughter and the grandchild? So this is quite difficult when we actually want to transfer citizenship to other children in Malaysia. Now, the law in Malaysia currently, right, it stands as to where the father, if the father is a Malaysian, automatically the children will become a Malaysian as well, but it's quite difficult for the mother. But by right, after the latest law, which has been reviewed, once the mother gives birth in Malaysia, then it's automatically the same too. Second, we have people who lack documentations. Now, these documentations, they are not merely confined to birth certificate or marriage certificate. In usual circumstances, is just these 2 documentations. But the lack of information in those documentations play a pivotal role here. Because in Malaysia, right, it appears that there are people who are stateless simply because they do not have any appropriate documentation or information in those documentation to help them obtain citizenship. Now, in many of these cases, the documentation that was missing mainly involved birth certificates and marriage certificates, like I mentioned earlier. However, even when a person has a birth certificate in hand, sometimes the information on the birth certificate, which is deemed lacking, such as who are the parents of the child, like we might know the particulars of the mother, but not the father. So we will need to do a prompt and thorough search. For example, we have to make sure we do a DNA test or other proof in order to show that the child was begot by the particular parent, which is quite difficult and it's not easy. So this will actually take a lot of time, and it's very straining to the party involved. Now, while it's true that lack of documentation may intersect with other causes of being stateless, like I said earlier, maybe because there is the gender basis and also lack of documentations or information in those documentations, it is also imperative and important to actually point out that these documentations alone can be substantive barrier to acquiring citizenship, which currently I think most of the Malaysians that we saw earlier, that the 10,000 people, they are actually facing. When there are no enough information given, this is why we don't have an identification to be given to these people, and hence why they are always deprived from their rights. So this is definitely unfair for all of them, because by right, it shouldn't be. These are all basic rights that one should gain and should not be deprived from. So here we have another case which the speaker actually shared. So this woman here, she's a 63-year-old woman of Indian Tamil descent who holds a permanent residentship card, even though her mother, who is aged 86, is a Malaysian citizen, and her 3 other siblings have Malaysian citizenship. Meaning to say that she alone, she doesn't know why she doesn't have this citizenship in Malaysia. And this was only found out down the road when she was trying to do the application, that her mother lost her birth certificate and has made numerous efforts by attending to all these registration departments to get a new one fixed. But until today, she has not been able to do so, because not only she lost her birth certificate, but eventually certain details in the birth certificate are also missing. So you see, it can be quite tricky. Now, as for the third category or classification, we have got abandoned children or foundlings and adopted children. Now, in this category or classification, right, it involves a bigger and larger parties where there are Swakam, and then we have got Jakim, all these because they involve kids below the age of 18, very young kids. So here, right, the abandoned kids are most of the time adopted by people in Malaysia. So a stateless child here who is adopted by Malaysian parents do not always obtain citizenship automatically. Now, you just look at the circumstances where if you have this biological child and you still deprive your right from obtaining the citizenship for the child, what more when it comes to child that you adopt? So these are not at all fair. And this case here, it is actually quite sensitive, but I'll just share it with you all. So this case here, it says that this child, she's a 21-year-old who was born in Malaysia and was adopted by 2 Malaysian citizens. So she was adopted at a very young age, I think just a few months old. So she did not know that her biological parents and who are they. The only thing that she knows that her biological parents are actually from Philippines. They are under the Philippines descendants. So she realized that she was stateless when she was 12 years old. And when she wanted to apply for an IC, she was not able to do so. So she tried to apply for citizenship, and then it got rejected. Again, she applied for the citizenship when she was 13, after being reissued a birth certificate under the adopted parents' details and particulars. Yet again, the application took her 8 years to reach a decision, which it was last year, she received a negative decision in which the application was again rejected. But she has no idea why. So she is still awaiting for the pending rejection reason to be given by the Swakam. All right. And under this category, right, okay, this is for children of mixed marriages or children born out of wedlock or before the marriage was registered. So under this category alone, it will bring us together all the cases that involve stateless children where their entitlement to Malaysian citizenship arise from the fact that there are 2 here. Firstly, the parents born to parents where the father is a Malaysian citizen and the mother is not. So the mother is definitely not from Malaysia. And secondly, we have got children who are born of parents who are not legally married at the time of their birth, meaning to say that the child was born right before the marriage was registered, or the child was a before wedlock child. Now, under the first classification, which is for children of mixed marriages or alternative families. Now here we also have another case. In this case, this boy here, he knew he had no citizenship. He was aware of his status of being stateless because of his alternative family arrangement, where his father, a Malaysian citizen of a Chinese descent, was married to his first wife, who by right is a Malaysian citizen as well. But the father got engaged in a relationship with his biological mother, who is a Filipino citizen. Now, this child here, he was born in Sabah, Malaysia, but because his parents were not married and his mother is not a Malaysian citizen, his birth certificate indicated that he did not have any status, because again, if it was with the first wife, then should be no problem, but this is with another lady, a Filipino citizen, and they were not married. They have no legal marriage documents as well. So along down the road, the parents are both deceased, as in they passed on. So his father died when he was around 8 years old, and his mother died when he was around 15. So when his father died when he was around 8 years old, when he actually wanted to apply for his IC, rejected. And again, when his biological mother died when he was 15, he couldn't do anything. So he tried to apply for citizenship twice after he turned 18. So his first application was rejected. This is after he was 18 years old. And his second application, which I think he submitted in 2014, is still under consideration. So he actually indicated to the speaker, to one of the speaker, when they were actually liaising with these cases, that he was born in Malaysia to a father who was a Malaysian citizen at that time, but he has never been to Philippines and has no connections to anyone in Philippines, not even to the Filipino mother. Yet he was still deprived from his rights, and till today, he is going to a private school. He has no proper education because he has no identification to call on his own. So that is quite sad. And where the children is born in Malaysia and is a de jure stateless. So de jure stateless is a term that we use to identify these stateless people. The usual question which arises in most of all of these pro bono cases is whether or not the child has a blood right to citizenship is irrelevant under the federal constitution, because if we look at Article 14 and 15 of our federal constitution, they do not mention anything about blood right to citizenship. Is very irrelevant and it has got nothing to do. What more when it comes to people who are deemed stateless at this stage? So as long as the child is born in Malaysia and is not a citizen of any other country, that is all that is needed to gain citizenship by operation of law. So while I was actually attending the webinar, right, there was another speaker where she shared her personal experience, which till today she is still trying to put in effort. She is still meeting all the ministers in charge in order to get a citizenship for the child. Because what happened in that case is that she is a Malaysian. The husband is from England, if I'm not mistaken, and she gave birth to the son in Sri Lanka, where the husband was actually working at that point of time. So this happened like 4 to 5 years ago. And till today, the child has got no citizenship, and the child is actually suffering from child mental depression because the child thinks that the mother is down here in Malaysia alone and the father is in England. So he has all this child mental depression going on. And at the same time, when she went to meet all these ministers and all the parties involved to get the citizenship for the child, right? The only thing that they mentioned was your application should not be rejected because by right, you are the biological mother and you are a Malaysian citizenship. So by right, you have to get a citizenship for your child. But the only thing that was being a hurdle for the mother was that the child was born in Sri Lanka and not in Malaysia. So I think it's about time we will have to review this and give a proper guideline, because if we look at it in that manner, it is definitely unfair. Because looking into this current situation, like for MCO, for instance, right? So during this MCO and this COVID-19 pandemic, if you're actually stuck in overseas and you are actually a Malaysian citizenship, you happen to give birth in overseas. So what actually happened to the child? Will the child be deprived from his or her citizenship in Malaysia? So that is very questionable, and I think we will need a proper guideline and a complete way out to actually help these people out. Now, moving on, we have got children born out of wedlock or before a marriage was registered. So again, this is another pro bono case, which it involves a China citizen, where in this case, he is a Malaysian citizen of Chinese ethnicity. So he's the father of a stateless child from a relationship with a Chinese woman from China. He was not married to the mother of the child because he was still married to his first wife at the time the child was born. So in this case here, the mother of the child, okay, which is the lady from China, she has returned to China and has got no contact with the child at all. Now, the father applied for citizenship on behalf of the son in 2013 and waited 2 years until he received a rejection with no reason. So this was quite similar to the case that we saw previously, but what differs here is that he was told to apply again. So he was not given any reason why his application got rejected the first time, but he was told to register. And when he went to the registration office to inquire why the application was rejected, he has no clue, no idea. He was not given a proper closure. And then he submitted another application during a registration drive 3 years ago in a drive in Penang. And he's still awaiting for a decision till today. Now, these situations are all almost similar, where they either don't have documentations or they are married to another woman, and at the same time they have a child with another lady who are not a Malaysian citizen. So the scenarios are mostly the same, but what is the way out to actually help them is still unknown. We still don't have a guideline to actually say that, okay, if you fall under this classification or category, this is what you can do, or this is where you need to seek help from. They are still reviewing all this. And then fifth category or classification is we have this indigenous person. So this one refers to aborigines, where they are defined as aboriginal people with unique cultures or ethnics. A very common one is our orang asli. So the federal constitution here, right, it acknowledges the special rights attached to the aborigine people in Malaysia. So while these people here may be stateless due to some reasons mentioned earlier, it is also important to actually recognize that these people as a separate category, because the ethnic minorities living here in isolated areas of Malaysia, right, they have added a barrier of lack of access to services that would allow them to potentially access citizenship. Now, looking into the current situation, we have a lot of orang asli around. So they are like the minority here. Okay, you can just see them everywhere. They will be at one corner of the road or one corner of a junction without any proper and basic rights given to them. So by right, by looking into this kind of classification, they shouldn't be having any lack of access to services, because they are also human beings in the first place. Despite their unique cultures and ethnics, they should not be deprived. Okay. And lastly, we have got refugees and children of migrant workers. Now, most of the time we hear that we have people coming from Indonesia, India, Thailand, and they have been working here for quite some years. They happen to be migrant workers, right? So they also have a particular category or classification to identify them as a stateless person. Now, this case here is quite interesting because she is an 8-year-old child who was born in Malaysia to parents with Indonesian citizenship. So both her parents are Indonesian citizenship, and her parents have lived in Malaysia for 10 years. Actually, right, this case is very close to my heart because I happen to be my grandma's neighbor, which I've seen the girl growing up. So this was actually one of her personal story that she shared. So her parents have lived in Malaysia for 10 years. They work under construction, both of them. So the parents came to Malaysia on a work permit, but her father has been without a legal work permit for 1 year, and her mother without a legal work permit for 4 years. So this happened 10 years ago. So the parents, right, they stated that they cannot afford to pay for the work permit, and they have no one to actually help them financially and mentally for them to actually go and put in so much of energy and effort to go and apply. Now, in 2017, the mother applied for citizenship for the daughter, mainly because the daughter was not permitted to go to school and her parents could not afford to send her to private school. Now, one thing about depriving your rights for education, I think that is one of the worst among all, because if you have no proper education, then there is no point. You cannot do anything. Okay, so in this situation, it is quite sad to see that a small child, a little child, she was not able to go to school only because she doesn't have any identification to call as her own. And another reason is because her parents, they do not have any money. So who are there to actually help these people to give a closure or an answer to help these needy ones? Now, Malaysia is not a signatory to Refugee Convention. Like I mentioned earlier, we do not know who are the parties involved to actually help them and guide them through. So the decision as to whether we will need to recognize a group of persons as refugees is highly political, so we do not touch into it in detail. But as for children of migrant workers, I believe they deserve an answer too. All right. So in conclusion, in a nutshell, what we can understand from today's session is that the definition of stateless people are still the same. They fall under these categories just like any other countries. However, what can we do to help them to give an identification is still a big question mark, which we truly deserve an answer and closure as soon as possible. Because if we look into other countries, right, I think it's about time that we actually adopt their international principle of dominance and how effective their nationality is in order to help us eradicate and get rid of this statelessness for most stateless people in Malaysia. But again, we can just give our thoughts and views, but it's all up to our government how they would like to review on this. So I think that's the end of our sharing session today, and I hope it was helpful and useful to all of us.
Okay, thank you, Kanaga. So is there any question to Kanaga? Okay, if don't have any questions, so we will end the sharing session now. Okay, thank you, Kanaga.
Thank you. Stay safe all.